What? How can you say this? So this was brought up earlier by Bavaria that said, did you see Rising on the Hill? Which I think they mean Hill Rising. A segment regarding Rogan/Communist Canada. It quickly transformed into an anti-trans rant. Plus more. It was crazy as F. All right, let's get a little taste of this. I'm just curious what the hell. 'Cause I don't know who this person is on the left. I've seen Robbie. I have not seen Batya.
King of podcasts, Joe Rogan, had this to say recently about Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Let's listen.
Canada's communist.
Canada's crazy.
They're they got to get rid of that guy.
How much time does he have? I feel like he's been prime minister for a while. Am I wrong?
I don't know. I don't know how their system works up there. I have zero understanding of their system.
Yeah?
I never looked into it at all. I didn't.
So I covered this clip already, but I got to say, because I didn't say it at the time for some reason, but to go from Canada's communist to saying literally the next sentence, I don't know how their system works. I know nothing about them. Oh my God.
I liked him. I liked him before the pandemic.
Trudeau?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, he's a handsome guy.
Yeah.
Seems sweet.
Yeah.
You know, it's like good looking guy, confident, good talker.
Yeah.
And then during the pandemic, I'm like,
By the way, what does that say about your politics? If you're so fooled by someone that's good looking and well spoken that you just think they're a great politician. I mean, he's really telling on himself here. A couple years ago, Rogan said that Kyle Kalinske was his favorite political YouTuber. Does he still watch Kyle? Because it feels like Rogan has only gotten much worse.
oh, you're a dictator.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't like criticism. You're trying to shut down criticism by saying that all your critics are misogynists and racists.
Yeah.
You hear he said that about the trucking people, the truckers?
He called them.
Called them all misogynists and racists.
Oof.
Yeah, he's
Not true, but okay.
gross. He's a sketchy guy.
Yeah.
And he's got some shaky deals. I would like to see like where the money is coming from. Like why do you want everybody to get injected every 4 months? They don't need that anymore. Like what do we do?
What is he watching? This is just conservative garbage. Less than half of Canadians even have one booster. So what is this getting vaccinated every 4 months? Like, what are you talking about? And by the way, somebody brought this up on Twitter, so I'm going to read it out. Joe Rogan lives in Texas, a state where, one, it's a crime to sell a dildo. So he's calling Canada communist. I think he means authoritarian, but for him, it's the same thing. But he's calling Canada authoritarian, yet Texas, it's a crime to sell a dildo, which isn't exactly true. I looked this up, but there's regulations around how many dildos you can own, apparently. Like, there's basically the dildos are more regulated than a lot of things. So dildos, it's a crime in some ways to sell a dildo. It's a crime to seek an abortion. It's a crime to smoke a joint. And more of its population is in prison than any other democracy on earth. That's Texas. Free Texas. The very free Texas where you can't, where you can only own 12 dildos. Can't own 13. Just own 12 dildos. I'm paraphrasing, but there's some weird rule like that. It's really bizarre. Now, I'm not sure how enforced it is, but, the abortion point alone, I think, is enough to drop the mic. You can't be calling other countries authoritarian when you are restricting abortion access. Nikki, and I'll continue this because we haven't even got to the points yet. But Nikki O'Brien says, thanks for your good work, David. I've been watching for a long time, but couldn't afford to donate until now. Greetings and thanks again from Fayetteville, Arkansas. Or is it Fayetteville? Arkansas. Thank you. Thank you, Nikki. Very generous donation as well. You didn't have to, but thank you. I appreciate it. Let's finish these comments.
What are you doing? You can't even get into Canada unless you're vaccinated.
Can't get in?
No. Make sure that's true. Because someone just told.
Which, by the way, I keep pausing this, but I covered this in my video. You also can't get into the U.S. as a foreigner if you're unvaccinated either. They have the exact same rule. So if you're Canadian, you can get into Canada. If you're American, you get into America. But if you're unvaccinated foreigner into either country, you can't get in. So the idea that this is like a uniquely Canadian thing is so stupid.
Told me. Whitney just told me. She had to show her vaccination card to get into Canada.
That seems
It's
that,
a little.
like it adds up for
It's
the.
old.
Yeah.
Like it's 2022. It's not 2019.
You know where it still feels because I think things sway there so aggressively when something happens, where it feels like you're like, wait, what time is it right now?
They go on about New York for like 2 minutes. I don't know why that they're even showing that.
Might be bleeping some of those words, I think, before this goes live. So hopefully you didn't. Or hopefully you did. I don't care. It's for whatever our television standards are. Anyway, interesting sentiments from Joe Rogan. I just Googled it. It does look to me. I thought Canada's requirement that you need to get vaccinated to enter. I had thought that had maybe lapsed, but I just Googled it. It looks like it still is the case, and obviously. Non-Americans coming to America actually also have to be vaccinated still, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But there you have it. What did you make of Rogan's comments there, Batya?
Sorry, somebody said something I want to mention. Oh yeah, Tom Segura is better than this. I agree. That was from Derek. Yeah, I do think Tom Segura is better than this, and you can see him kind of try to move the conversation along on Canada. He didn't want to harp on it too long because I don't think he knew shit. And if he wasn't Rogan's friend, Tom Segura would be making fun of Rogan because he's the kind of person that Tom Segura would make fun of. But because they are friends, that it's not going to happen.
I, too, started to see Justin Trudeau in a very different light after the truckers' convoy. Before that, I had thought that he was a sort of like, a kind of like flabby liberal, right? Like, how much harm could this person really do, right? It's in human rights. Like, he has a weird way of expressing himself, maybe very.
Oh, my God. There's to see Americans that don't know shit about the convoy talk about the convoy is very frustrating. To be fair, not just Americans, to see anyone that doesn't know shit about the convoy talk about the convoy is very frustrating as somebody who covered it closely. Trucker group after trucker group after, union after union were like, this is not us. 90% of truckers are vaccinated. There's maybe a sliver of those so in terms of the vaccinated population, in terms of the rate of vaccination, the truckers were vaccinated at the same rate as the rest of Canada. So they weren't some outlier of like, oh, there's more unvaccinated truckers than I don't know, teachers or something. It wasn't the case. Exact similar number to the rest of Canada. So the convoy was launched by far right-wing individuals with ties to far alt-right groups, a couple of which, or at least two of which that I can recall, maybe three or more, went to jail after it because of the shit they were doing and they were engaged in. So this is all this idea about, oh, do it for the truckers, stand up for the truckers. It was all bullshit from the start. And for these people to claim that they're on the side of the working class truckers is such garbage when it was largely the actual truckers that were there, which again, very few of them were actual truckers, but the ones that were there were the employers. They weren't, the working class truckers. They were the ones running the companies. So it's really stupid to see the way this has been, construed. But it doesn't matter how many facts you get out there. These people aren't going to take it because it doesn't serve their narrative.
Very much in that sort of college-educated manner, but how much harm could a person with these kind of like human rights values actually do? And what we saw was he descended into this total caricature of what we've been calling the laptop caste, the pajama class, right? Somebody who misunderstands his obsession with COVID as some sort of like virtue, when actually what it is elites enforcing their standards on the very people who they rely on to keep them alive, right? And then exactly like Rogan said, he smeared.
What is any of this? There's been vaccines forever. I guarantee you that she is vaccinated. Not just the COVID vaccine, many other vaccines, because this is a part of science. This is what we've learned. Hey, to not have this disease, To not have polio, you got to get these vaccines. And guess what? Polio disappeared until like today. There's like one case now in New York, apparently, the first since 2008. But this is why we vaccinate, to eliminate these viruses, or at least in the case of COVID, downplay the effects of it. But they treat it as like the elites talking down to you. Yet, what are the criticisms when it comes to the actual, who actually has gained in terms of wealth during the pandemic? Like, that should be the bigger critique here. If you care about the elites and their hold on power, then you should be discussing why are billionaires doubling their wealth during the pandemic while everyone else is making less, while everyone else's wealth is going down. Like, that is the actual critique you should be having if you cared about the elites. But instead, it's a purely cultural discussion about, oh, they're making me feel bad because they called me a bigot or a racist, or they told me to get a vaccine and I didn't want to. Like, it's just pure surface level. And again, a complete distraction from the actual issues, which is what conservative media does. They distract you with the garbage so that they can continue selling their pro-billionaire, pro-corporate policies.
Feared those truckers as fascists and Nazis because they had this populist wellspring of support against this very, elite top-down, I'm going to enforce on you while relying on you to survive. I'm going to tell you what to do while I need you.
No, they were called that because they were literally Nazis and fascists. Like, that's what the organizers of the convoy, that's what they were. They were not truckers.
I think that it was sort of like that truckers convoy, and now what you're seeing in the Netherlands with the farmers, like there really is an uprising, a populist uprising against the elites happening, across the globe. And when Trudeau sort of leaned into his kind of authoritarian, condescension, rather than accepting the criticism and recalibrating, that to me was like, it was a really telling moment because it put the lie to my previous thoughts of like, well, how much trouble could this liberal actually get? How much could this, person with these liberal values, how much could he actually hurt people? And the answer was a lot. He could hurt them a lot. And I think that
How? Is she going to say how they were hurt? Is she going to say how? Look, I don't even like Trudeau. I don't want him to be prime minister. But this is not this is not the better option here. Is she going to say anything about how they were hurt? How were they hurt? Their feelings were hurt? Or were they actually hurt?
That thing where he now represents that sort of elite condescension that has a kind of semi-authoritarian side to it, that doesn't only call the working class Nazis and racists for objecting to their own oppression, right? But actually forces them to put something in their body that maybe they don't want to, or not be able to feed their families. Like, this is something that's emerging. It's emerging here as well, and it's really dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was nothing there. That was pure surface level garbage. There was nothing there.
Absolutely, and I think it's
Yes, I'm playing at 1.5 speed because I'm not going to play this at normal speed. That's not going to happen.
shows how this kind of political figure, this kind of candidate, is losing voters that the Democratic, or in Canada it's not Democratic, but the Liberal coalition, the Blue coalition, needs to stay in power. If someone like Joe Rogan, who, let's remember, even though now he's associated and tarred as this right-wing figure, was a supporter, favorably disposed toward Bernie Sanders, and has said that multiple times, and for him to be kind of pushed into a kind of more Team Red coalition.
Wait, hold up. I was like zoning out while he was talking.
To stay in power. If someone like Joe Rogan, who, let's remember, even though now he's associated and tarred as this right-wing figure, was a supporter, favorably disposed toward Bernie Sanders, and has said that multiple times, and for him to be kind of pushed into a kind of more Team Red coalition, it's taken actions like what Justin Trudeau and I'm sorry, also many Democrats in the U.S. have done with respect to kind of identity.
How are you comparing Trudeau to Bernie Sanders? Rogan moved from Bernie to being more right-wing because of Trudeau, who is diametrically opposed ideologically to Bernie Sanders. You have a neoliberal and a democratic socialist. None of this is coherent. It's like a bunch of just conservative buzzwords just thrown out there.
Politics, COVID, and some other topics that are pushing independent-minded left and populist people toward the Republican Party. It's because of this stuff. It's because of over-the-top.
Yes, very populist to be anti-abortion, to be anti-contraception, to vote against abortion rights, to vote against interstate travel for reproductive care, to vote against contraception access, to vote against marriage equality. So populist. Yet, interestingly, The populist position is to be in support of all of these things. But no, Republicans, populist ones, based on what information? Based on what positions? Again, nothing. It's all about, oh, my feelings were hurt because he pointed out that there were Nazi flags at the trucker rally. Oh my God. So now I'm gonna be in support of Nazis. Like if that's how if that's how terrible your politics are, that somebody calling you out for being a Nazi is gonna make you even more of a Nazi, okay, I guess there's no winning that. But the idea that somehow, like the thing with Rogan is just a pure reactionary. It's like whoever's in front of him, he'll change based on the week. He doesn't know what the hell is going on. He's very disconnected. He's had, especially recently, a lot of commentary about very anti-poor, that joking about the homeless thing, about shooting homeless people. That was one. But even talking about how people don't want to work anymore. I covered this video where Rogan was talking to a friend of his who just happens to own a restaurant, because of course he's not talking to the waiters, and apparently the restaurant owner can't get people to show up to work anymore. Maybe because they don't want to work starvation wages, maybe because they can't afford to live in LA on the salary they are making, or the tips they are making at that restaurant. Like, this is, again, Rogan is completely disconnected from the working class, yet they're the ones trying to claim that Rogan is speaking up for the working class. 100 millionaire podcaster, UFC commentator, speaking for the working class, that is completely disconnected from reality? I don't think so.
Wokeness, craziness on COVID, disdain for working people who are protesting or treating their protests like, it's the end of the world. When they celebrated the Black Lives Matter police injustice protests were celebrated, other protests were derided. That had an effect. You're seeing that effect in people like Rogan, and we talk about him a lot in the show because he's a big audience. His audience overlaps somewhat, at least I think, with our own. So it's interesting to follow the trajectory. But the trajectory should be concerning if you're a Democrat, isn't it terrifying? And instead of seeing panic from Democrats that they're losing these people, what I see is almost a contempt. Well, good riddance. They're racist. We don't want them as part of our team anyway. We want our team to be only the most morally pure, upstanding, identity-driven people. And
if someone is literally racist, why would they vote for Democrats over Republicans? So yes, in terms of messaging issues and in terms of educating people, yes, it's important as people that are ones trying to win them over to not talk down to certain groups of people who are the ones that are honestly confused, the ones that honestly want to learn, the ones that honestly want to, support the right causes, do the right thing. Yes, that's why it's important not to say if you're, at a barbecue and your uncle brings up, trans issues and he's really ignorant and stupid. Don't make that person feel dumb. Like, you can educate them in a way. If he honestly wants to learn and know better, then there's a way to discuss these issues in a way that doesn't make that person feel stupid. Yes, it's very important to be able to educate and talk to others in a one-to-one manner that doesn't talk down to them. But when it comes to people that have platforms, when it comes to those that have power already, when it comes to lawmakers, people like Josh Hawley, who was called out for being transphobic, when it comes to them, they know better, especially in the case of someone like Josh Hawley. They know better. They have power. It's important to call out their bullshit because you have to expose them for who they are. Now, when it comes to those that maybe follow them and are just confused, then yes, there's a different, way to message there. But people in power, the message changes depending on what the audience is, who you're talking to. And just, again, all of this is very empty because he doesn't bring up, at least so far, no actual policy about why the GOP are somehow better off for the working class. Like, what are you talking about? Yes, both parties, terrible, largely for the working class. But when it comes to one, Republicans definitely a little worse. There is no squad in the GOP. There is no Bernie Sanders voting with Republicans. There is a reason for that.
And they're going to be down to a coalition of like 16.
Right. We know from Pew that only 6% of Americans are what they would consider progressive. 6%. It's so teensy compared to the amount of attention that they.
How people self-identify with a name, with a label, does not equal actual policy positions. Again, this is such stupid commentary. I've mentioned this point in other videos as well. Like if you look at polling on how people self-identify, and it largely the choices are conservative, moderate, or liberal. Most people say moderate or conservative. Yet, when you poll those same people on actual policy positions, do you want to expand access to healthcare? Do you want universal healthcare? Majority say yes. Do you want higher taxes on the rich and lower taxes on the poor and middle class? The answer is yes. Do you want to deal with the climate crisis in a real and responsible way that puts support into renewable energy? The answer is yes. Go down the list of policies. The vast majority of people support the progressive policy. Labels mean shit because how certain people view a label is different than how other people view that label. You may think of, being moderate as, I'm a fiscal conservative and a whatever. The thing is, there's so many different ways to view these labels. So, like usually this is how the stuff plays out. When it comes to the self-labeling, people usually attach their cultural views or their reactionary views to that label. So, certain people may be in support of or maybe unaware of, let's say, trans issues, and they may attach that issue or those topics or the idea of wokeness, whatever the hell that means, to liberal. So they're not liberal because they're not woke. They don't want to be labeled as woke because they don't speak down to others about not knowing anything about, this or that. So they don't view themselves as liberal. Yet those same people would support expanding healthcare. Those same people would support a wealth tax on the very wealthy. Those same people would support higher wages when it comes to a living wage. So it all depends on the individual. And that's why labels are so stupid. You have to look at the actual policies. What are the policies that you support? And that is what that person actually supports.
They take up on our airwaves. I totally agree with you, Robbie. I think for decades, the left represented the kind of commonsensical, obvious point of view that was not reflected in reality, that every human deserves to live in dignity. That was a left-wing proposition that the right did not agree with, right? For many, many decades, they didn't believe in gay rights, let's say, equality for gay marriage. They didn't believe in, equal protections for women. They were not as concerned with civil rights. The civil rights movement was opposed by many Republicans, which is when the Democrats got that lock on black voters, right? All of these are commonsensical, obvious ideas. They're thousands and thousands of years old, right? The idea that we're all
And how is that going today?
created equally in God's image, and we all deserve to live in dignity. That was a left-wing proposition for decades.
And now what? The Republicans are all in support of equality? Is that what she's trying to argue now?
That is now an idea that the left kind of, to me anyway, seems opposed to, right? If you talk about Dr. King's vision that we be judged based on our character, not the color of our skin, forget it. They consider that to be racist now.
Oh, yes, of course. Dr. Martin Luther King, he would be big supporter of Donald Trump and the right wing. He would, oh my goodness, he absolutely would hate. Actually, he would hate the Democratic Party for obvious reasons. But he was a socialist. He was on the left. He was clearly on the left. To bring him up in this conversation is so sad and just embarrassing.
You tell them that, women deserve to live, in dignity with equality. They're like, well, what's a woman? What about trans women, right? Now the right.
Oh my God.
Right has become associated with.
Yeah, what? Is she trying to claim that he would be against equal rights for trans people? This is some disgusting shit.
With the commonsensical idea that people should be able to live in dignity with autonomy, should be able to make their own decisions about what happens to their body and to their children, right? That is now bizarrely become a right-wing proposition.
What? How can you say this? How can you say this? I didn't think she would actually go there. I thought she was gonna beat around it because she couldn't actually claim that Republicans are the ones in support of this stuff now. But she did. That's the turn she made there. That was incredible. That was incredible. Let's listen to that again.
Be able to live in dignity with autonomy.
Hold up, I got to slow this one down. That was too amazing.
Now the right has become associated with the commonsensical idea that people should be able to live in dignity with autonomy, should be able to make their own decisions about what happens to their body and to their...
The right is associated with bodily autonomy and what should happen to your own body. Are you fucking kidding me? How stupid is this lady? I shouldn't say stupid. How dishonest is this? She has to know she's full of shit. She has to. Who is paying her to be this dumb?
Children, right? That is now bizarrely become a right-wing proposition almost. And I think that is something, that's exactly what you're pointing to. And nobody embodies that like Joe Rogan and the shifting sands beneath him that had him once standing kind of on the liberal side and now sort of more identified with, I don't want to say the right, but certainly with the populist energy.
To your point.
Yeah, it's very populist to talk about your friend who owns a restaurant saying that people don't want to work anymore when they're getting underpaid. Very, very populist to be in support of a Florida governor, to want him for president when he is anti-trans, anti-weed, anti-abortion, is trying to restrict bodily autonomy, is trying to restrict you being able to use a plant that's been used for hundreds, if not thousands of years and has no real negative impact. It just, especially like considering how pro-weed Rogan is, for him to be living in an anti-weed state in Texas and to be in support of an anti-weed Republican governor in Florida, it's like, look, weed isn't the most important issue, but it shows you, it's an indication of who that person is. Biden at least faked it, right? Biden also anti-weed, but he pretended to want to make it or to decriminalize it. And the Democratic Party, the only one having that conversation in a serious way. I think there's maybe like one or two Republicans that want to legalize weed, but it's largely a Democratic issue. And again, it goes to speaking to actual freedoms. Again, none of these actual policies are being brought into the conversation. She's completely ignoring everything the GOP have been doing, including the extremist right-wing Supreme Court. It is just, this is an alternate universe.
Point, I think.
Don't they normally have on like one conservative and one, not as bad person? Like, this is just two complete dipshits here.
Progressives have lost the language a little bit of being able to talk about universal principles because they're so focused on disparate harms to specific groups. So that's the way all problems have to be filtered through that. I think you saw that pretty clearly with like the messaging on abortion rights going away or being rescinded, where
like the civil rights fight, these same people would be calling it a disparate harm, or what was he saying? Harm to disparate groups. Basically trying to treat these issues as like, oh, not important, minor issues, just these minority groups that are being oppressed by the state, whatever, who cares about that? Not important issues. These exact same people would be on the wrong side of civil rights, using the exact same logic.
Specific groups. So that's the way principles, because they're so focused on disparate harms to specific groups.
Disparate harms to specific groups. Quite a way to downplay reproductive rights, quite a way to downplay trans rights, and what is being done to families in Texas. Some parents having their kids being taken away because they allowed their kid to be who they are. To downplay all of that and try and claim the left is authoritarian, when it's right-wing Republican states that are the ones doing this garbage, is just, it's an amazing feat of, gymnastics here.
groups. So that's the way all problems have to be filtered through that. I think you saw that pretty clearly with like the messaging on abortion rights going away or being rescinded, where the ACLU starts tweeting about how this will disproportionately affect LGBT people, et cetera, which makes no sense. This is, if you're going to make, if you're someone who's going to argue that this is a bad thing and these rights going away are wrong, you can make a very universal case. This affects, very.
But isn't that the bigger issue? That those rights are being stripped away as opposed to what the ACLU said in their statement in one sentence? That, bothers you for some reason? I don't know why you would even care about that. But why is that the focus? Again, these are distractions. They have to focus on one sentence in the ACLU's press release as opposed to what the Republican Party and their project has been doing for 40 years to strip rights away from people. How is that not the focus here?
It very much affects one of the two main distinguishers of all human beings, women. But they can't use that language because if it doesn't affect a smaller minority group, that's what they're comfortable with criticizing. Like, oh, this is a bad policy or bad idea because it harms this smaller interest group that are all of our language and all of our marketing and all of our activism is now oriented around protecting. Which I'm not saying that you should be against those people or do anything. But it's not additional. It's not in addition to normal. We're also going to look out for these people. It's like we can only talk about it if it's this kind of thing. And that language is alienating to so many people.
But literally stripping the right away, that's not alienating. Limiting the ability for women to access health care, that's not restricting. That's not limiting their freedom. No, it's the messaging that the ACLU put out in their press release in that one sentence. Very alienating. Like you give a shit about what they release in their press releases. But I'm sure, Ben Shapiro, somebody grabbed this one piece and then the entire right talked about it and that became the big story as opposed to the actual right being stripped away. Like these people, their arguments fall apart in milliseconds, just upon the slightest reading of what they're trying to sell you here. The propaganda is just incredible. And this guy, I think, knows better because he was struggling a little bit because I think he was catching himself, realizing he was making no fucking sense. But, oh my God, it is just amazing, the shit they focus on.
And I think, Robbie, this ties into one of your bugaboos, which is the masking. You'll often hear people say, well, there are immunocompromised people. We should all be invested in protecting them, right? Like the idea that there is a subgroup that has an extra something, an extra requirement, an extra need, and that everyone, like 95% of people who are not immunocompromised should now change in order to accommodate that. It reminds me of...
Yeah, when someone has a peanut allergy in class, and the teacher says, don't bring peanuts. And you're like, screw that. I'm bringing all the peanuts. And then you kill the child in the class. That's freedom. The ability to kill people that are vulnerable. That's when you're truly free. These fucking psychopaths.
A lot of when they talk about birthing persons, in 10 years, how many trans men are going to have had a baby? Is it going to rise to double digits? You know what I mean? Like it's such a tiny percentage of who's going to end up requiring that kind of language.
Yet, isn't it interesting? This is your focus here. That's what they're focusing on. Because one person said birthing, no one is making a pregnant woman call themselves a birthing person. If anyone thinks that is a made up, completely manufactured talking point from the right. No one is saying that. But if somebody is trans and they're having a child and they're not a woman, maybe they don't want to be referred to as a pregnant woman. So to understand that really is just to be humane. Just to treat people with dignity. This is who this person is. This is their name. This is their pronouns. Okay, that's who they are. Why is there even a discussion here? Like, who cares? But they're the ones generating an entire narrative around this because, again, there's nothing to actually offer anybody. As you've seen in this entire segment, No mention at all about any policy, anything. It's just pure, this vague cultural discussion, vaguely around these issues. And then even going as far as to claim that Republicans are the ones standing up for bodily autonomy, as they are the ones literally stripping the right of women away. Okay, let's finish the end of this garbage. See, where else can this possibly go?
That kind of activism, but everybody else is supposed to be involved in this sort of mass accommodation of this, tiny minority.
Right. Right, and I don't, right, and you can acknowledge that because any rule, any category you try to establish, there will always be exceptions.
Yeah.
But you say the overwhelming majority of people who give birth are women, and there are, because of anatomy, because there's always going to be exceptions. There's always going to be edge cases.
And no one's arguing this. These are straw man arguments. No one's arguing this.
But we don't have to act like the main rule, the main definition doesn't cover virtually all cases, because it does. And that's not harmful. I don't think that's hateful to acknowledge. It's certainly not causing violence, despite what was kind of implied at. We're dancing around that hearing that took place last week between Josh Hawley and that doctor who he had that interesting
Berkeley professor, yes.
Because that was a statement that was a part of a larger discussion around these issues that included everyone who gave birth. That was the discussion. But no one's telling anyone who is pregnant, who's a woman, to say, don't call yourself a woman. Like this, again, these are just completely manufactured narratives around nothing. And why was that hearing happening? Because Republicans stripped reproductive rights, abortion rights away. Yet that's perfectly fine. That isn't worthy of the discussion here. What's worthy of the focus is the term birthing person, and you don't want to say birthing person. That's worthy of your discussion, but the actual stripping of rights away, not that important apparently. These people are psychotic.
Conversation with. All right, well, tomorrow on Rising, we're going to dig into what exactly is causing inflation, as we've.
Oh my God. Okay, that's the end of it, thank God. Jesus Christ.